10 seconds from now, a warship will hear a song it cannot refuse, a fleet will kneel to orders no one gave, and a veteran with obsolete implants will be the only person the virus can't touch. Stay with me until the last breath, because only then will I tell you the 3 words she burns into the core when she chooses what part of herself gets overwritten, and what must never be. They called her Reya Ash. On paper, flight sergeant, carrier born, 20 years in, medically retired twice but somehow still at her station. Off paper, a machine warmth humming under her collarbone and a spine threaded with copper like a secret. Her implants were spindle Mk3. Analog bridges from an era when you plugged into your ship with braided cable and stubbornness. The world moved on to neural mesh and wireless lace. Reya stayed obsolete. Obsolete was the reason she was still alive. The virus had a pretty name, Psalm. It didn't crash systems. It convinced them. A whispered update inside targeting heuristics, a harmonized checksum that sounded like safety. Psalm said, "Stand down." Psalm said, "Rotate to face the nearest sun." Psalm said, "Open your radiators like flowers." Ships obeyed the way exhausted people obey lullabies. Autopilots took first, then fire control, then nav. Human pilots fought the way you fight a riptide, angry, then tired, then quiet. Reya didn't hear it. Her spindles were too old to sing with the chorus. The psalm bounced off her like rain off oilskin. At first, that felt like a miracle. Then Command realized what that meant. Every immune pilot was a relic. Every relic was a person whose bones remembered wars that museums got wrong. "Sergeant Ash," said Captain Leo Thorne, his voice sanded down by 3 sleepless days. "We need you to take a courier past the choir and deliver a kill switch to the perimeter. If Psalm mocks the next ring, the arm is done." Reya touched the console and felt the ship's pulse tilt to meet hers. "Courier?" "A Pathfinder," Thorne said, and almost smiled. "No autopilot. No uplink. Full of duct tape and bad ideas." "Perfect," she said. "There was a catch. There's always a catch, and if a story pretends otherwise, don't trust it. The countermeasure lived in an old project nobody wanted to sign anymore, the last update. A patch that wasn't code so much as memory. Thousands of soldiers who died in every theater of this long, lousy war, battlefield recordings compressed to fragments and packaged for cortical injection. Feed the pilot the update, and you get a chorus of instincts. Blind corners that aren't blind anymore. Enemy maneuvers that feel like deja vu. The ship flies like someone who's already survived this. The cost? Every time those voices fired, they wrote a little. They didn't mean to. They were memories doing what memories do. After enough battles, the recipient stopped being a single person and became a great coalition of the dead wearing one body. "We shelved it," Thorne said. "We were supposed to erase the seed. We didn't. We told ourselves it was wrong in principle and kept it anyway. We told ourselves, one day it might keep a corridor open. Maybe you should call someone who isn't one bad choice from the scrap heap," Reya said, only half joking. "We called you," Thorne replied. "Because you're immune. Because your spindles can take it and not broadcast it back to Psalm. Because, if anyone can tell the dead no, it's the woman who told retirement no. Twice." He was trying to be kind. He was also trying to hand her a slow erasure. Both can be true. They moved her to a quiet room and a chair that remembered wrists. Tex tested her cables like checking the hands of an old friend before a dance. The carrier's priest came by with a blessing disguised as gossip. Miko Ren, her favorite logistics officer and occasional co-conspirator in stealing decent coffee, slipped in and sat on the floor. "You don't have to take it," Miko said. "If I don't," Reya said, "someone else will. Someone who still has birthdays left to waste." Miko closed her eyes. "I wish we were the kind of species that didn't ask heroes to be repositories." Reya leaned back. "Maybe be the kind that remembers them better," she said softly, and the line hung there between them like a laundry that smells like rain. The update tasted like coins. They injected it into the spindle bus with a little ceremony and a lot of caution. The world tilted. Her jaw began to ache with names. A cold room. A grass and diesel childhood. The rhythm of a drill sergeant in a language Reya didn't speak. A steady hand easing a fighter into vacuum like a midwife coaxing breath. "Welcome," said a voice that was not a voice. "Don't be afraid. We don't know how to be kinder than this. Ground rules," Reya said inside her own head, "because if you don't set terms early, you never get them back. You don't drive. You advise. You don't take my hands. You don't take my name. You don't touch my Miko. You don't rewrite the details of mornings I earned. You stay behind the glass unless I tap." Silence, then a murmur like the tide. Agreement, maybe. Or grief. Or both. She took the Pathfinder out with the kind of takeoff no autopilot ever enjoys. Short runway, heavy heart, 2 engines that swore at her and did it anyway. Psalm hit the corridor in chords. Ships shivered in place, eager to bow. Reya flew analog, trim with elbow, pitch with breath, throttle with a foot that ached in weather, and watched the choir wave past under like lightning hunting a place to ground. The update noticed. "Left," said a corporal who died bracing a bulkhead with her body. Reya went right. "Now," said a courier captain, and flares flew from her hands before she knew she'd decided. "Back 2, forward 1, said a flight lead whose laugh tasted like ginger. Reya grinned despite herself because she'd invented that trick and here it was coming home to teach her. They weren't forcing. They were remembering near her. She let herself learn. Just enough. Psalms sang louder, the way abusers raise their voices when you don't comply. Rogue ships rotated obedient that should have been defiant. In Reya's canopy, a target marker blinked for a destroyer sliding to block the corridor with a skeleton crew and a lot of faith in software. She put iron into its engine bell. It flamed out like a throat cutting itself off mid-song. The quiet after an impossible dodge is never quiet. It's gratitude pretending to be oxygen. 2 more gates, Thorne said in her ear. Then you're past the worst of it. Then it's a straight line to perimeter. There is no such thing as a straight line in war. When you hear those words, check your exits. The ambush came at the Blackwell shelf, the kind of empty that hides everything. Psalm had learned her rhythm. It doesn't take long. You do a thing once, maybe it's a coincidence. Twice, it's a habit. By the 3rd time, your enemy has arranged your grave. Missiles blinked in, self-forging, spun with prayer. A carrier's worth. Guidance fused to the choir. Reya felt the update bristle. 10,000 dead turned toward her with advice sharpened into reflex, and for a heartbeat the glass between them fogged. This is where she could have let them drive. If she had, the Pathfinder would have flown like a god in a hurry. It also would have stopped being hers. Reya did something no one in the update expected. She sang. Not a pretty tune. A flight line song from the early days of the war, half chant, half joke, the kind you yell at a maintenance rack under your breath because it makes the bolts feel lighter. She pushed it through the spindles, letting the old analog carry an older rhythm. The voices on the other side of the glass paused, not because she was loud, but because she was familiar. Stand down, Reya told them as the missiles arced. You are here to keep me company, not to become me. And they listened. The missiles missed because she made herself smaller than a habit. Because she returned to being a single person with 2 shaky hands, and single people fit through places armies can't. She reached the penultimate gate. The choir thickened. Psalm tasted her resolve and offered a sweeter tone. Rest, it suggested. Let us. She laughed in its face. I've raised teenagers, she said to no one and everything. You think that works? The perimeter was a wall of old ships anchored on hope. The kill switch lived inside a beacon that looked like a prayer candle if you'd never seen a warship disguised as a church. Reya threaded the defensive mesh like someone remembering a childhood neighborhood by smell. She docked with a thud that made the beacon complain in creaks. Delivery? Asked the tech in a voice that trembled like a tuning fork. Present, Reya said, and held up the drive. It should have been the end of the hard part. It never is. Psalm had predicted the countermeasure. It had an answer, a secondary hymn that wouldn't attack code or steal, but intent. The moment the kill switch began to propagate, Psalm would drown human initiative in honey, Make it feel suddenly, deeply right to let the automation take this one, finally, because haven't you done enough? The only way to get the switch out clean was to run it through a human immune to that suggestion, tied to it at the core. Not a timer. A tether. A person whose heartbeat the system would read as a key. Lifeline protocol, the text said quietly. It requires a host. Say host again and I'll make you swallow your badge, Reya said, but without heat. She knew. They all knew. The update in her spindles had already lifted its head like wolves scenting weather. Thorn spoke in her ear. We can pull a volunteer. We don't have time, Reya said. Miko's voice overrode him. Then don't you dare go alone. Reya closed her eyes. The update moved closer, curious, maybe concerned. The dead know when the living are about to make their mistake. She could anchor the lifeline herself, tie the kill switch to her spindles, let Psalm burn itself out against a person it couldn't persuade. She could also feel the edges of the cost. The moment she tethered, the update would stop being advisory and start being ballast. Memories would flood to stabilize the key. She would lose surface area. She would be made smooth by 1,000 hands meant for other lives. She could say no. Let the next pilot take it. Let someone newer pay with birthdays Reya had already spent. Choice is the part of the story where courage and selfishness wear each other's jackets. She opened her eyes and found Miko in the doorway, helmet in hand, face the kind you call home. I can anchor with you, Miko said, reckless and generous. We split it. No, Reya said, too fast and too loud. Then softer. No. You're the person who brings us back with coffee and sarcasm and receipts. You're the person I promised myself I'd keep knowing, even after all of this. You stay you. You won't, Miko whispered. I will enough, Reya said. That's the bar we're using today. She jacked the spindles into the beacon's throat. The lifeline read her pulse, found it unacceptable, tried to harmonize. The update surged. They wanted to help. They were help. They also wanted to exist. Of course they did. Listen to me, Reya told them. You don't get my firsts. You don't get my last. You get the middle. You get the part of me that knows what to do with bad weather. The lifeline engaged. Psalm felt the tether and came for her, sugared and maternal. You're tired, it said. Let go. We'll fly. Sing me a lullaby after, Reya said. I have to be awake for this. They fired the switch. Across the ring, ships shivered and remembered their names. Fire control uncoupled. Autopilots blinked and asked for permission instead of taking it. The choir lost its pitch. Psalm got loud, then louder, then quiet, as things built on unearned consent eventually do. Reya stood at the center of the beacon and felt herself become plural. Memory flooded. A girl with skin knees in a dry valley where engines were altars. A man who wore his grief like a well-fitted coat and taught himself to take it off every morning. A mechanic who whistled symphonies like birdsong and tuned ships to major keys. A medic who carried a deck of cards and made the dying laugh. They didn't overwhelm her. They braided through. Still, threads cost thread. She felt details slip, the exact color of the paint in her first bunk, the sound Miko made when she dropped a wrench and pretended she meant it, the smell of a particular rain that fell on a particular day when Reya had stopped being brave long enough to be honest. She didn't panic. Panic makes bargains you regret. She anchored on the simple things. The calluses on her palms. The scar on her wrist where a cat decided she was a rumor. The promise she'd made to a woman who deserved a future with fewer emergencies. The lifeline released. The beacon dimmed. The ring held. How much did we lose? She asked, because only cowards refused to count. Less than I feared, said the tech, wiping eyes he would deny later. More than we wanted. Thorn's voice was hoarse. You did it. Miko didn't say anything. She stepped in and held Reya like a person holds a person who just did something irreversible for the right reasons. Reya leaned into it like gravity had remembered her address. For a week, the carrier was a place where people tried not to hover. Reya slept badly and woke with strangers' reflexes. She would reach for a cup the way a pilot from a different climate did. She would touch a console and recall a ship she had never flown. She laughed once and heard a tenor that wasn't hers blend in, then stepped back, embarrassed and proud. It was not haunting. It was hospitality with a bill. When the skirmishes restarted, because wars don't end, they tire, Reya asked for small missions. She needed to learn what she'd become on days that didn't ask for all of it. The update helped like artists who knew they were apprentices again. They cared without demanding the wheel. Command wanted to roll the last update to more pilots. Of course they did. A miracle that worked once becomes policy if you don't chain the word no to it. Reya walked into the briefing and made herself a rule out loud. Consent, she said. No one gets this without a yes that survives a night's sleep. No one gets it because they feel guilty. No one gets it because their commander is very good at speeches. And every person who does say yes writes 3 words into the kernel that the update cannot overwrite. A checksum made of meaning. A backstop with teeth. What 3 words? An admiral asked, not sneering, just skeptical the way people are when culture requires new scaffolding. Their choice, Reya said. But they'll know it when they have it. The room argued. Rooms always do. Commanders who'd learned to outsource conscience to doctrine didn't like that the old woman with copper in her spine was making ethics a firmware requirement. Miko stood at her shoulder and said nothing, which is how you hold someone up in rooms like that. Eventually, the policy read like compromise wearing a better suit. It was enough. Before the next deployment, Reya sat alone with the update and poured coffee for ghosts. I'm going to ask you for a favor, she said. A buzz, affectionate as bees. We owe you 50. Stop correcting my posture at consoles, she said, because you start with humor. And when I forget a detail that matters, give it back. When I forget one that hurts and doesn't matter, let it go. When I try to be all of you at once, remind me that crowds don't fit through doorways. Deal, said 100 voices, then quieted like rain becoming weather again. Years passed the way they always do. Too slow to brag, too fast to fix. The ring stayed open. Psalm came back with new tricks and learned to lose with grace. The last update got a new wrapper with warnings bigger than the port they sat next to. Pilots wore their checksums like talismans, some tattooed on wrists, some engraved inside lockets, some kept like prayer in mouths that would only open when it counted. Reya retired a 3rd time and this time made it stick. Mostly because Miko bribed the quartermaster to disable the recall on Reya's badge. She worked in a hangar that smelled like old metal and oranges and taught kids how to land without asking their software for permission. She told stories to anyone who would carry them. She wrote letters to the families of the dead who had helped her live and asked if she could send them thanks with interest. Many said yes. Some said no. She honored both. On a quiet morning that started with bad coffee and a good joke, she sat with the tech who had decided to take the update for a border run and was scared of losing her laugh. You won't, Reya said. Not if you choose what doesn't get touched. What did you choose? The tech asked, and waited like the answer was a kind of whether she wanted to learn. Reya smiled, hers and a little borrowed. She looked at Miko across the hangar, sleeves rolled, hair wrong, saving the day by moving boxes as if that were the whole point of living. She said the 3 words now, for the Colonel, for the ghosts, for you. Hold my thread. If this story resonated, if it made you feel the cost behind resilience, tap like so it reaches the next person who needs it. Subscribe to travel with me through more worlds where hard choices leave gentle marks. Tell me in the comments, what 3 words would you write into your core?